Okay. Thank you all for coming out on this cloudy and dreary day. But you can see that we are still surrounded by beautiful, wonderful lit up stained glass windows, which I think is sort of a testament to their brilliance and how they were created, that even on such a gloomy day, they can still bring such light and beauty to our sanctuary. For those, I think most of you know me, but for those who don't, my name is Michelle Hickey. I am a deacon at the church. I'm a Sunday school teacher. I'm on the Christian Education Committee. I've served on the search committee. I'm in the bell choir. I sometimes sing with the singing choir. My parents met at this church. So the Second Reformed roots run deep for me, and I'm so happy to be sharing this presentation about 170 years of church history. And I also, in college, majored in art history and anthropology, so I have a little bit of background to talk about this. So I would like, if I may, to take you back to 1855. Franklin Pierce is the president. The Northern Valley Railroad had just been established 5 years earlier in this area. There was no fire department or police department. And Hackensack wasn't Hackensack yet. It was called New Barbados Township. It didn't become entirely called and officially called Hackensack until 1921. Our story begins at the first Dutch Reformed church, also known as the Church on the Green, a historic church that had been in operation since 1686. It is currently the oldest existing church building in Bergen County and the second oldest in New Jersey. Its cemetery is the resting place of Colonel General Enoch Poor, and his funeral at the church was attended by George Washington and the Marquis de Lafayette. In 1855, a number of its members felt that the church had become too straight for some of the brethren. As our fourth pastor, Reverend Arthur Johnson, put it, in his account of the church's first 50 years, when the hive is too full, the bees swarm. It was time to plant a new church and roots into new soil, and growing in fruitfulness, push out other shoots into the surrounding neighborhood. Hackensack was growing quickly, and there was a need for a new church in the northern part of the village. And so, on October 31st, 1855, the Second Reformed Protestant Dutch Church of Hackensack, New Jersey, was officially formed, and its first service was held in the Church on the Green on November 11th. But the new church needed a new building. A plot of land on State Street between Camden and Berry Streets was donated for this purpose by Mrs. Maria Berry, who you can see here, whose own ancestor, John Berry, was one of the first settlers of Bergen County and had, in fact, donated the land that the Church on the Green stood on. So it ran in the family. Until a new church could be built, services were held in the State Street School that stood across the street, and that is now Hackensack Middle School. The cornerstone of the new church was laid on July 30th, 1856. It contained, among other things, a Bible, a copy of the Heidelberg Catechism, recent editions of magazines and newspapers, a copy of the memorial sent to the classes of Bergen requesting to found the congregation, and a sketch of the organization and progress of the church up to that point. In total, minus the furnishings which were provided by the women of the congregation, the building cost $6,800, which is a little over $253,000 today. Finally, the church was dedicated on June 17th, 1857, and in here we can see an exterior of the church, which you can see was made of wood and had a tall steeple, and also a photograph of the interior, which featured some live plants, apparently. I found a map of Hackensack from 1896, and in the yellow circle, you can see that they had illustrated the first Second Reformed church in that map. The church's first pastor was Reverend Dr. James Demarest, and for those of you who live in this area, Demarest will be a familiar name, and he was, in fact, a descendant of David Desmarais, who was an early settler of Bergen County. He was the son of a pastor and came to our church straight from New Brunswick Theological Seminary. He wrote that the understanding was from the first that the new church represented a more vital form of Christianity than the place had been familiar with for some time previously. The old church's preachings had been stiff and uninspiring, with a, quote, deadening effect upon spiritual sensibility. There was a need for a presentation of truth that should be quickening upon the conscience and heart, and this new church aimed to supply. He practiced a more loving and relatable form of church, which included visiting all of his congregants. This proved popular and resulted in many new members. He was also passionate about missions and began the long and honored tradition of our church giving back to those in need. A chapel was added during his tenure to allow more room for Sunday school and church meetings. Our next pastor was Reverend George H. Fisher, who came out of retirement to serve the congregation. During this time, the church continued to grow, a bell was placed in the tower, an organ was installed, and repair and decoration of the church were completed. It also saw some small groups leave to form other congregations, but overall, congregational membership grew. Reverend Fisher resigned due to ill health and passed away in 1872. Later, a memorial window in the north of the church was dedicated to his memory, depicting Christ among the doctors in the temple. So that is that second window on this side with some yellow in it. That's dedicated to his memory. The Reverend Cyrus B. Durand was the next pastor to serve the church, beginning in 1871. Unfortunately, his term saw many deaths and removals from the congregation, but the church nevertheless flourished and took additions to the chapel, as well as the construction of a new parsonage. The church's fourth pastor, Reverend Arthur Johnson, faithfully served the church for 39 years. Beginning with a congregation of 90, Reverend Johnson welcomed new members to the church at each month's communion and grew the congregation up to 523 people by the church's 50th anniversary in 1905. During his tenure, the Hudson Street Mission was established in a needed part of town to provide Sunday school, reading rooms, and a Christian Endeavor Society for those in need. Needing more space for the growing church, in 1894, he moved the chapel to a new location to allow for widening of the church, increasing seating by 50%. Stained glass windows were installed, and the organ was moved and given a new motor. Gas and electricity were installed to light the building, and women of the congregation redecorated the interior spaces. On November 12, 1894, the church was rededicated. Several memorials were installed as part of the renovation, including the Walter W. Johnson Memorial Room, which connected the church to the chapel and held the original version of the stained glass window that's currently in our dining room. A stone baptismal font was given in the memory of Cyrus Knapp, and 10 of the men of the congregation presented a bronze pulpit by J. and R. Lamb. And just to skip ahead a little bit, J. and R. Lamb also made stained glass, that studio, and they made the two windows that are at the either side of the back of the church, the sunset and sunrise windows. Yeah, yes. On the occasion of the church's 50th anniversary, Reverend Johnson reflected in some key descriptors of the church, that it was living an evangelistic life, which preached the word of God and grew his flock, that it was emphatically missionary, passionately supporting missionaries abroad and mission projects which helped the local community, and that it had been actively engaged in enlargement, not only of its own congregation and sanctuary, but as the parent of many other churches in the area, which were formed by small groups of former members of Second. These institutions include Christ Protestant Episcopal Church, Asbury Methodist Episcopal Church, the First Baptist Church, the Calvary Baptist Church, the Unitarian Church, and the Mount Olive Baptist Church. Furthermore, member Judge Peter Bogart donated the land and money to found the Pagoda Memorial Church, where a church was greatly needed in memory of his wife, Maria E. Bogart. For the 50th anniversary, Senator William M. Johnson, namesake of the Johnson Library and a well-known resident of Hackensack, donated a new organ to the church at a cost of $8,000. The interior was redecorated and recarpeted, and electric lighting was installed. And then disaster struck. On April 15th, in the early hours of Monday, April 15th, 1907, the church was burned to the ground as a result of a large fire that started in a neighboring barn. The Evening Record's headline was, "Second Reformed Church, now a mass of ruins. Fire destroys the edifice and 5 barns at an early hour this morning. 1 horse burned. Total loss, $50,000. Flames first enveloped the Ackerman Combination Barn and Carpenter Shop, which stood 10 feet from the lecture hall of the church. A high wind was blowing and spread the fire to John D. Baldwin's barn, then Dr. George W. Brown's barn, Dr. G. Howard McFadden's stable, and George C. Giffen's barn. Sparks from these fires carried over to the roofs on Main Street and as far as the Oritani Field Club. Though the firemen believed they had contained the fire to these barns, someone noticed that the lecture hall of the church had caught fire. The flames eventually crept to the inner roof of the church, and fire erupted above the organ before engulfing the steeple. Reverend Johnson and some officers of the church rescued carpets, cushions, Bibles, hymn books, and the pulpit furniture before abandoning the building. The paper described the event as probably the most disastrous fire the town has ever experienced, but already it is understood that the premises destroyed will be restored at the earliest possible date. Indeed, Second Reformed wasted no time in beginning plans for the construction of a new building. Services were held at the Oritani Field Club, which you can see here, in the interim, and property for the new church was secured when the heirs of Mrs. Maria Berry, who had given the land for the State Street Church, relinquished their revisionary rights and allowed the original plot of land to be sold to pay for the present property at the corner of Anderson, Union, and Ward Streets. So you can see here again in the 1896 map, the larger circle is the original State Street Church building, and the little circle is where we are now. Architects Mr. Edward Pierce Casey and Arthur Durant Snedden, and builders from the Glenn Engineering and Construction Company of New York were selected to build the new church, and construction began. Ground for the present building was broken on April 19, 1908, just over 1 year after the fire, and the cornerstone was laid on June 21st. You can see here a photograph of them laying the cornerstone. At this time, the cornerstone contained 50 years of church history, records of the church events since the fire, lists of persons and companies involved in the rebuilding, a Bible, a hymn book, records from the Bergen County Historical Society, newspapers from that month, photographs of the original church, photos of the cottages that had stood on the new plot where the church was built. So those are the pictures on the left, the cottages that had to come down for this building to be built. Early construction photos, photos of local buildings, including the Hackensack, and photos of local buildings, including the Hackensack Courthouse. Reverend Johnson closed the ceremony by saying, "The 2 mottos of our beloved Reformed Church are a fitting appeal at this time. The first upon its escutcheon is Eintracht macht Macht, union makes strength. The other is Nisi Dominus Frustra, without the Lord, all in vain. Except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it." So you can see here that we actually have the logo of the RCA above our tower door, etched in stone. Reverend Johnson, the phrases that Reverend Johnson used at the end of the cornerstone laying ceremony are also featured on this shield of the Reformed Church. They are in the, can I point here? Yes, in the top here and the bottom ribbons that Eintracht macht Macht and Nisi Dominus Frustra. And these actually, the crest of the RCA actually is derived from the coat of arms of William the Silent, or you may know him as William Orange of the Netherlands, who fought against the prosecution of Protestants and for the independence of the Netherlands from Spain. I won't get into detail of what all the symbols mean, but essentially the different parts of the shield are for different titles that he held and the house that he was from, the House of Nassau. So then from that shield, when the RCA adapted the crest, it added the mottos to the top and the bottom. The first service in the new building was held in the chapel on March 21st, 1909, and the dedication service was held on September 19th. You can see in these photos views of the exterior of the building from Ward Street, in that photo on the left, along with a floor plan. And then you can see a view from Anderson Streets And so you can see in the floor plan that we have, this is where we're sitting now, the sanctuary, and this area over here is like the lounge and the kitchen and the hallway. The bulletin for the dedication service of the church stated that the architecture of the church is described as being English Gothic with many features in the perpendicular style. The roof of the main auditorium is in the hammer beam type with heavy timber work, thoroughly bolted and fitted. Trusses are ornamented with Gothic tracery and support pendant lamps of rich design. So you can see, these like wooden structures that support the lamps. These are the trusses, and you can see kind of in the middle of them, I'm not sure how I can point to you, but the shapes in the middle, that they kind of remind me of the cards that the Queen of Hearts has in Alice in Wonderland. That shape, which also actually you can see in our windows here, the outline is called a pointed trefoil arch. And if we look at the outside of the building, you can see here that those trusses are supported by exterior work as well, and that the truss work allows for the ceiling to be as tall as it is and also as wide open as it is. A note also that the chandeliers that were in the sanctuary when the church was built in 1909 are not the ones that are here today. The original ones were made of plaster of Paris and had angel designs on the side. You can see that in the left photo here. And the change to the current glass lamps was made in the late 80s or early 90s when a member, Frank Gajewski, who was a member and an architect, designed and hung them. Going back to the bulletin from the dedication service, it said that the wainscot of the chancel and around the windows and also the pews are done in quartered oak in elaborate Gothic panelings. So you can see here, I remember I pointed out the shape of the pointed trefoil arch. You can see that shape again in the woodwork back here. And on the communion table, you can see kind of a four-pointed circle. That shape is called a quatrefoil. Any guesses for what a shape that has four parts symbolizes in a church? No? How about the four writers of the gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? So, and then I'm not sure if we have an example in this picture, but there is a similar, when it's 3 points instead of 4 points, it's called a trefoil. And guesses for what 3 points? Yes, so if you see anything, any shape that has 3 points, actually, if you see in the trusses, kind of the hollow triangle of the truss has 3 points. That's and here we can see a slightly more detailed image of the communion table, which has pointed arches, and also the sides of all the pews have pointed arches. And then finally, a rose window with subdued olive tints adds greatly to the dignity of the church. So you can see our rose window up there, which was part of the original construction of this building. The exterior walls were built of rubble masonry erected in the most substantial manner. Local stone was procured from the neighborhood of Spring Valley near Fairmount, and with the exception of the cornices, and tracery around the windows, which were limestone. Everything was made from this local kind of field rubble, which I read that congregants brought to the church by wagon. And also the roofs were made with heavy slate, and the gutters and water spouts were made of copper. So you can see here, the current lounge didn't look like the current lounge originally. It had a big half-circle hole in the ceiling. So photo is from the 1909 construction. You can also see in the plans here that there's kind of a semicircle in the floor layout. That used to be the Sunday school, and it said the Sunday school with its circular gallery and spacious classrooms adjoining has proved most convenient and attractive for the uses for which it is designed, and the kitchen and entire basement may be used for social purposes. So here's another picture where you can see the lounge as it used to look. And you can kind of see the semicircle here, and this is the door that leads to the hallway currently. You could see that here as well. So just to give you a little flavor of what the church used to look like at that time. Our current baptismal font was given for the 75th anniversary in 1930 by Mr. and Mrs. W. Edward Foster in memory of Jane Louise Foster. And the first person baptized in the current church was Richard Cornelius Leash in 1909. And you can see on the baptismal font some important kind of religious imagery, which you can see at our church, but you can also see at many other churches. The first symbol that you can see, this one, is the Alpha and Omega, which are Greek letters, but they are the first and the last letters of the Greek alphabet, and Christ is the beginning and the end. And in Revelation it says, I am the Alpha and Omega. The next symbol is the Chi Rho, kind of like an X shape and a P shape. And these are the first two letters of the Greek spelling of Christ, which is Christos, and they're intersected. It was used by Constantine as his military standard. And then finally, we have IHS, which is really Iota, Eta, Sigma, but it is the first three letters in the Greek word for Jesus, which is pronounced kind of like Jesus. So those are some important religious symbols that you can see here. And they also are on our lamps. If you take a look at the lamps, the part with the red background, you can see the Alpha and Omega and the Chi Rho together. And in the blue, you see IHS. So they pop up a lot. The windows for our church are styled after those found in cloisters. If you walk down the hallway that's here, you can definitely feel that it's reminiscent of a cloister. And those are open-air walkways found around monasteries. As you can imagine, in order to pay for the new building, many memorial gifts needed to be commissioned to help pay for it. These included stained glass windows, hymn boards, a piano for the primary department, a book rest for the pulpit, and the communion service. Rug and fireplace fixtures for the pastor's study were given by the Weir Den Band of King's Daughters, and the Women's Aid Society gave the carpets, cushions, and church furniture. The men's club paid for the stone tablet with the coat of arms that we saw earlier, that's above the tower door. And they raised money for this by melting down the bell from the original church building and creating 100 tiny little bells. You can see one here that's in our display case. And they were sold for $1 each to raise money. The new organ, made by the Hutching Organ Company of Boston, Massachusetts, was once again a gift of Senator William M. Johnson, and the motor for this organ was used from its installation until it finally died in 2016 at 107 years old. Okay, so the church's next pastor was the Reverend John Charles Rauscher. During his time at the church, it celebrated its 75th anniversary, and the church upgraded from hot air furnaces and one large stove to a single oil furnace, added the inner doors at the entrance of the church, stained the hymn boards to match the rest of the woodwork, renovated the organ console and rail, and added the missing top half of the pulpit. Additionally, hassocks were cleaned and recovered, and 12 or 20 cushions added for the comfort of the aged women of the church, to give comfort to their weary backs. Additionally, the memorial pulpit chair, the angel windows above the tower door, which you can see there, and memorial communion table and baptismal font, memorial collection plates, and the memorial window for Reverend Johnson were also given. In 1938, the church's name was officially adopted as the Second Reformed Church of Hackensack. Reverend Rauscher also authored a retrospective on the church and noted the following things which were achieved by the members of our congregation. We put the hospital and its kindred organizations up on the hill, put the attractive library on Main Street, put up the Second Reformed Church and equipped it splendidly, made it possible for us to have a YMCA, put a stamp of excellence on the children's home, always remembered the home for aged women, made a church in this part of town, kept the Hudson Street Mission and Italian Church alive, gave the Bogart Memorial Church and Parsonage, and founded the prosperous Teaneck Community Church. So you can see here a couple of the buildings that members of ours helped to make possible. This is Johnson Public Library. I can't remember, I think this is the home for aged women. This is the children's home, I think. That's the YMCA. This must be part of the hospital. And this is the Bogart Memorial Reformed Church. So we mentioned that a number of our members made these things possible. So one of our most well-known members was Senator William M. Johnson. And as you know, he's the namesake of Johnson Library and Johnson Park. A very prominent member of Hackensack, he held various town offices, including on the Board of Ed, and held a deep interest in the development of the public school systems. He was one of the original founders and trustees of Hackensack Bank, the president of Hackensack Trust Company, a member of Consistory at Second Reformed for many years, a member of the Oratani Field Club, Hamilton Club, Lawyers Club, Princeton Club of New York, and a New Jersey state senator. At Second Reformed specifically, he donated several windows to both the old and new church buildings, as well as the organs. His home was built on land that once held the home of G. Myers Anderson, the namesake of Anderson Street, and went on to become the site of the Sears Building at the corner of Anderson and Main Streets. So a familiar location for us all, and very convenient to the church. Another important member of Second Reformed was Judge Peter R. Bogart Jr. He's a descendant of the Bogart farming family. He was a freeholder, commissioner of roads, one of the committee to cash the $150,000 Civil War bonds, and a judge of common pleas. He gave Bogota its park and built/donated the land for the Bogart Memorial Church in memory of his wife, Marie Euphemia Hopper. At Second Reformed, he was one of the oldest members of the Synod, as well as of the Classis of Bergen, and gave the Resurrection Memorial window in memory of his daughter. That window is the one all the way in the corner over here. And then we have Mrs. Edna B. Conklin. She was the daughter of John A. Cole, who was influential in local politics, and she founded the Bergen County Women's Republican Club in 1922 and played a vital role in advancing women's participation in politics, serving on both the state and national Republican committees. Additionally, she was instrumental in establishing the Bergen County Child Welfare Department, the Children's Home, which she visited daily for almost 25 years, and the country's Juvenile and Domestic Relations Court. She was also the president of the Hackensack Hospital Auxiliary and a member of the Old Age Pension Board. The Gethsemane window in the rear of the church is dedicated to the memory of her and her husband, along with another couple. And now we come to the church's sixth pastor, who was the Reverend Harvey B. Hoffman. We can see here we have out in the lounge, actually, someone painted a painting of him, and you can see the lovely stained glass windows in the background. And this same person painted an exterior painting of the church, which we're lucky to have and enjoy. During Reverend Hoffman's term, the church celebrated 100 years of worship in 1955. Some goals of the Centennial Committee were to increase church membership by 100 persons, improve the church both physically and spiritually, and inaugurate a program to solicit funds for the improvement drive. $213,000 was raised, 10% of which was donated to charity. The remainder of these funds went to church improvements, including filling in the open balcony in the now lounge, which we mentioned before, and that allowed the creation of the lounge and Sunday school classrooms upstairs, one of which includes a mural of biblical geography, which I'll go back a slide. You can see that mural in this picture. 2 nearby homes were also purchased and one demolished to replace and put in the 75-car parking lot. The organ was renovated and many pipes were added. During the centenary, they also put on a pageant which detailed the history of the church and the Reformed Church at large. It described how in the early days of the Dutch Reformed Church, there were no pews at all, chairs were brought from home, and when pews were added, they were cushionless, tall on all sides with doors that locked on the inside, and were for sale to the highest bidder. You can see some of these in this picture. Without heating, congregants carried around small foot stoves with hot embers from their home hearths, and you can see a model of one of these here that was used in the play that was put on for the centenary. And the services used to last over 2 hours with a vowelaser who led singing using a pitchfork to give the opening note and reading 2 lines at a time, echoed by the congregation, as they often could not read. The church's next pastor and 7th pastor was the Reverend Daniel Y. Brink. During his tenure at the church, we had 2 services every Sunday morning, and as well as on Christmas Eve. One member remembers that on 2 occasions, there was a tapestry that hung in the lounge and was stolen during the Sunday service twice during his time at the church. The church also had many associate pastors and interns over the years, and during Reverend Brink's tenure was no exception. Reverend Robert A. Phillips, who you can see here, served as the associate pastor from 1962 to 1964. There also were 2 interns from the New Brunswick Theological Seminary, Jack White and Dennis Wilcox, who both later went on to become pastors at Second Reformed. At this time, the layout of the church was a bit different to what it is now. You can see kind of an overall shot here as well as a detailed shot. You can see that the baptismal font is on the right side of the church instead of the left. The organ and the pulpit are in opposite places, and there had been the chair sat in the middle of the back of the choir. At this time, the church had a professional quartet, and the choir seats were on either side of the chancel facing one another. You can kind of see that in this picture, that the chancel was kind of on the side. The large chair, which is now where the bell tables are, let's see if I can, this chair used to be in the middle up here. And with 3 seats on either side of it, those seats are the ones that are now in front of the choir loft. The biggest change, though, that happened during Reverend Brink's pastorate is that an administrative wing was added to the church, which you can see blueprints for here. And this wing is where you walk in from the parking lot now. In this picture from Anderson Street, you can see that the church used to stop at the hallway just behind the sanctuary. The 1960s addition added a basement space, offices, and Sunday school classrooms. The upstairs and downstairs kitchens were also remodeled, and that included closing in a dumbwaiter, which used to go between the 2 spaces. And here you can see construction in progress. Right here is the parking lot door, and these are some of the windows where the restrooms are on the 1st floor. So now we come to our 8th pastor, who is the Reverend Edwin G. Mulder, and the father of longtime member Mark Mulder. Also during this time, Reverend David H. Manting served as associate pastor. During Reverend Mulder's time at the church, the building underwent some updates, including changing out the old beige wool carpeting in the lounge for the current green carpeting and adding the current drapes, switching the placement of the pulpit and the organ to where they are now, and installing a new 37-rank Austin pipe organ in 1978, which is still in use today. The pipes were also taken down and re-yielded during that process. A bell choir was started by Dr. Elwyn Spangler, with bells given by the family of Edna D. Armstead in her memory. And a singing choir also was started during this time. And both choirs still bring beautiful music to our church services today. Reverend Mulder also began the noonday Lenten service, where the church invites clergy from local churches to speak each week during Lent, which proudly continues on today. Among the early participants were Howard Hageman, who's on the left, the president of General Synod, and Reverend Arthur Calandrio from Marble Collegiate Church, as well as many other well-known pastors. During the Christmas season, the church rented a storefront on Main Street dubbed the Joyful Inn. It was a spot where weary shoppers could stop in, get a cup of coffee, sit and get warm, and talk to some of the members who volunteered all day. Young members who wanted to confirm their faith had to take a 3-year-long confirmation course, and consistory consisted of 24 men until the first woman, Emma Moore, was elected and ordained as an elder. And I did the math this morning. I'm happy to say that now the consistory is made up of 3/4 women. After leaving Second Reformed, Reverend Mulder became a major figure in global Protestantism in the 20th century. He served the RCA in many roles, including as the president of General Synod, the president of the Regional Synod of the Mid-Atlantics, just to name a few. He served on the executive committees of the World Council of Churches, the National Council of Churches, and the World Alliance of Reformed Churches, and was interim president of the New Brunswick Theological Seminary. Reverend Mulder worked for women's ordination in the RCA, a conclusion of apartheid in South Africa and the Reformed Church there, nuclear disarmament, and inclusion and respect for the LGBTQ community within the church. All of this he did primarily through listening and building relationships. Next was the Reverend Jack K. White, the 9th pastor of the church. Improvements made during his time include enlarging the chancel area and adding new steps, which was done by Walter Troik, removing some of the pews and replacing carpeting at the front of the sanctuary. You'll see that the carpet up front here is darker than the rest of the carpet, but that taking out those pews allowed for more room for different activities to take place at the front of the church. They also installed the lighted sign on the front lawn, replaced the plaster of Paris lamps with the current glass ones, and installed the overhead arch lights, which light the chancel. They also sold the last parsonage, which had been on Maple Hill Drive. The 10th pastor was the Reverend John N. Norton. Reverend Nancy Sorokoff served as pastoral assistant during his tenure, and Reverend David Gronveld was the associate pastor. Adult Bible study classes were held during the first of the 2 weekly Sunday services, and the sign by the Anderson Street parking lot was installed. In 1991, Second Reformed merged with the New Community Church of Teaneck, and many members who came from that church are still at Second Reformed today. After leaving Second Reformed, Reverend Norton went on to become very involved in the classis of the Greater Palisades and was the executive minister of the Regional Synod of New York, acting as a faithful servant there to all the churches in the region. I found this picture, which I think is from around 1993 or 1994, and if you look closely, you might recognize some people. I know me and my family are in the top corner here. I think Ken Crucius is there. I know I saw Carol in here somewhere. But there was one member I had no idea had been part of Second Reformed Church, Kermit the Frog. So I was happy to find him among our congregation. Let's see. Okay. So the church's 11th pastor was the Reverend Dennis B. Wilcox. At this time, the church moved from having 2 services every Sunday and on Christmas Eve to 1 each. The church office moved from being Monday to Friday to Tuesday to Friday, and communion went from being 3 to 4 times a year to being the first Sunday of every month. Air conditioning was installed in the lounge, and the baptismal font was moved from the right of the church to the left. And the reason was because Dennis wanted it to be by the entrance of the church, because when you're baptized, that's when you enter into the church. So he thought that was an appropriate place for the baptismal font to be. During Reverend Wilcox's time at the church, it celebrated its 140th, 145th, 150th, and 155th anniversaries. The quilt shown here was made for the 150th anniversary in 2005 and consists of squares decorated by each family in the congregation. Arlene Friel, Nancy Younger, and Carol Miller put the quilt together. Members could also contribute money for inscribed bricks on the lawn outside the tower door, which you can see. And it's hard to see here, but in the lounge, there's this image of the church, it's actually made up of photographs of all the members of the church at that time. So take a look at it in the lounge, you'll be able to see it better. The stained glass windows, pews, floors, and doors were also restored during this time. The pew and door restoration were completed by Eddie Holtz of Barefoot Cabinetry in Midland Park. At that point, the pews were falling apart, and Eddie spent 2 months replacing all but 4 of them, which he kept because they were, quote, irreplaceable. He noted that the grain of the wood was so gorgeous, the kind of wood you just can't get anymore. Eddie was eventually able to use some of the wood to help restore the doors, which had been rotting at the bottom. The church's 12th pastor was Reverend Dale Bittner, and was the shortest pastor of our church, serving 16 months. During that same period, the church also was served by the Reverend Roland A. Ratmeyer, who served as interim minister twice during the course of 5 years. During his time at the church in 2013, he participated in the C2C bike tour, where he cycled from New York to Los Angeles to raise money to help end the cycle of poverty. He saw the church through a period of great transition and also served many other churches similarly in his capacity as interim minister. And now, the 13th and 14th pastors of Second Reformed are Dwayne and Anna Jackson. Yes, yay. The last time I gave this presentation, they had only been here 2 months. Now, they've been here for 7 years, and they lead Bible studies, prayer groups, and classes at the church, have become very involved in the local community and work hard to build ties, have taken leadership roles in classes. Anna's the current president, General Synod, Dwayne was the president in 2022, and New Brunswick Theological Seminary. They also started our annual Easter egg hunt, biannual live nativity, an after-school STEM club, and do monthly jazz vesper services, just to name a very few number of things. I wanted to share here some church activities throughout the years. The church used to have a rummage sale twice a year for 50 years, so you can see an example of that on the left. And on the right is some fellowship time in the lounge. Here we can see a dinner in the Pine Room and some volunteers doing cooking down in the basement. We've always enjoyed meaningful worship and fellowship at Second Reformed, which you can see here. You can see Reverend Hoffman in these pictures, and some people standing by the tower door just here. And you can see some additional examples. In this picture, you can see they're in the dining room with that stained glass window behind them. This is a service in the basement, and then the front of the church on Anderson Street, or I guess that's actually Union Street. This is Reverend Hoffman serving communion and various people conducting, Dr. Brink, sorry. Various people doing various church business. Have been many confirmations throughout the history of the church. And you can see here some various confirmands. For those of you who've been with the church a number of years, you may recognize Audrey Michelle, who was a member of this church for many years. And also you can see Sue Davidson and her daughter Vicky is a baby. So some of you may remember these people. The Second Reformed Church Sunday School was founded in 1856 with 50 students, and lessons were held in the State Street School until the original building was erected. By the church's 50th anniversary, it had grown to 239 students, with 6 officers and 27 teachers leading the children. A notable contributor was Mary Pettigrew, who gave 60 years of service to the Sunday School. And our Sunday School continues to serve us well to this day. You can see here a youth group and some members of the Sunday School. Here's a Christmas pageant and Christmas service at the church, and some children in a Sunday school classroom, which is currently the one that's at the top of the stairs by the kitchen, and I think is used for some STEM activities. Carol remembers that we used to have a 30-foot Christmas tree in the sanctuary and put it where we now put the creche, and someone had to get on a very, very tall ladder to hang the lights on the tree. Here are some more Sunday school classes. Another one of the highlights of Second Reformed has been our dedication to mission work. In these photos, we see the Florence Nightingale Club, Dr. John B. Wyckoff, who was a missionary to India in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, sombrero piggy banks for the mission at Chiapas, Mexico, and surgical dressing ladies, who sometimes made in excess of 30,000 dressings per month. And here you can see Audrey Michelle again. The church also used to host a homeless shelter in the basement once a week for a couple times a year. 2 people from the church would feed the guests, stay overnight with them, give them breakfast, and make them lunch for the next day. Today, the missions committee is still very active. They sponsor a missionary in Mescalero, New Mexico, maintain a food pantry, and host regular events for the community's neighbors in need. In 1894, it was recorded that the Second Reformed Church is noted for its excellent music. Members of the congregation formed the first choir or chorus, and a quartet was formed by 1895. The tradition of strong musical groups blessing our worship has continued to this day. So here we can see a youth choir and also kind of the original quartet used to stand. They had these lovely kind of brass music stands. There's some more choirs. And you can see in this picture that this is when the organ used to be here, where the pulpit is. From their founding in 1955, Boy Scout Troop 11 met for many years at the church. You can see in the picture on the right that they're practicing some shooting. They actually used the space that's underneath the sanctuary as a shooting range. And here's some more pictures of them. And this is an interior shot of the sanctuary. I'm guessing this might be around Christmas because of the wreaths. This is a wedding at the church, and the exterior with the ivy. Throughout the church's history, there were a number of parsonages. The original was built in 1872 by the State Street Church. There were also buildings at Knapp Place, Clinton Place, and Maple Hill Drive throughout the years. And now we come to stained glass. So the earliest known man-made glass came from the Egyptians or Mesopotamians who accidentally discovered it when sand and nitrin mixed in their firing vessels. Some of the beads that have been found date back to between 2750 and 2625 BC. Some of the earliest known stained glass, meanwhile, was from the 7th century in England, specifically at St. Paul's Monastery in Jarrow, England, which was founded in 686 AD. And you can see 2 examples of these windows here. So that was in the 7th century, and by the 12th century, stained glass became a staple in the initial design of churches and not something that was added to churches later on. Stained glass windows were originally made to help the common man who, for lack of education or status, could not or was not allowed to read the Bible. By illustrating important Bible stories and favorite saints chosen by the benefactors who funded the windows, they helped teach poor congregants the important stories and lessons of Christianity. Furthermore, the common man didn't have access to artwork, which was a privilege reserved for the wealthy. The exception to this was in churches, which were open to all. So in addition to illustrating stories, the windows were a visual feast and really a great attraction for the worshipers. In the first quarter of the 12th century, a monk named Theophilus Presbyter described the technique for making glass in a book called De Diversis Artibus, on the various arts. For the most part, the technique has not changed in the following centuries from what he described, and stained glass windows are made much in the same way as Theophilus described even today. Glass was made by melting sand, potash, and lime together in clay pots. The glass was then, quote, stained with color, which was created by adding various metal oxides to the glass. Gold for red, copper for green, cobalt for blue, etc. This pot metal glass was often difficult to see through, so it was made into flashed glass by dipping a lump of white glass on the end of a blowpipe into the mixture and blowing, which created sheets of glass with a thin layer of color, which helped make it more transparent. This color could be rubbed off of parts of the glass, revealing the white glass underneath, and that allowed two colors to be on the same piece of glass. Over time, more colors were discovered, and then more colors could be added to one piece of glass. You can see in this circa 1280 window of St. Peter from Cise Cathedral in France, you can see how the glass, this early glass looked, and kind of its streaky coloring, which was because it had that white glass underneath it. The next process after you made the glass was that you made a 2-scale drawing or sketch, which was called a cartoon, of what the window would look like. This was either drawn out on a white tabletop, or today you would use a piece of paper. The cartoon indicated the various shapes, colors, and overall design of the window, including where the lead strips connecting the glass would go. Each piece of glass was then fitted to this design, cut first by cutting approximate pieces with a hot iron rod, then chipping away at the edges with an iron tool in a technique called grozing to create the more detailed shapes. In the 16th century and forward, they started using diamond cutters, which allowed for easier detailed shaping of the glass. Next, the glass needed to be painted. Using glass or vitreous paint, which is made of iron or copper oxide, ground glass, gum arabic, and a binder such as water, wine, or vinegar, glass painters used various techniques to add detail and texture to the glass pieces. And they, depending on what technique they wanted to achieve, they would use different varying levels of paint. So for facial features, like let's say the eyes here or the outline of the face, they would use a thicker paint, and then they might use like a brush just lightly dipped with paint and kind of streak it over for some of these like bubbly texture on the figure's face. So paint was used in various textures to create different consistency. They would use various animal hair, sticks, needles, quills, and fingers to create different textures and scratch out the paint to add depth or control the light coming through the glass. These designs were then fused to the glass by firing it in a small furnace or kiln. And this window that's here is called Head of a Patriarch from the southeast transept of Canterbury Cathedral, which was from about 1180. Finally, the pieces were assembled and bound together by strips of lead called cames. Putty was rubbed into the spaces between the glass and lead to make the window panel waterproof, and the panel was mounted on an iron framework, which was pre-built into the building where the window would be, and that was called the ferramenta. Lead was used to connect the pieces because it was flexible enough to bend around their complex shapes, but it also was strong enough to keep the glass safe from the pressures of wind. So Louis Comfort Tiffany was the son of New York jeweler and silversmith Charles Louis Tiffany, of Tiffany & Co. He was a brilliant artist and entrepreneur. He worked in painting and interior design before moving to stained glass. He was inspired by trips to Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, where he was in awe of the stained glass in medieval churches and cathedrals, as well as ancient glass being uncovered by archaeologists. He founded his studio in 1878 and began experimenting with weathering and firing conditions, as well as glazing and aging glass in an acid-charged atmosphere. His goal was to create paintings out of glass, minimizing the use of the enamel paint, which the previous stained glass makers had used, which he felt reduced the amount of light that could be let through the glass. The only place that Tiffany would use enamel paints was for face, hand, hair, and feet of the figures, as well as the palm fronds. The Tiffany studio, which was comprised of male and female designers, glaziers, and craftsmen, created a large variety, over 5,000 different hues of colors and textures of glass. In 1893, Tiffany and his father participated in the Columbian Exposition, or Chicago's World Fair. Tiffany created a chapel which featured brilliant examples of glasswork made of mosaics and stained glass, and consisted of an altar, a baptistery, chandelier, and windows. The attention Tiffany received from the fair catapulted his popularity and the demand for his work. Before Tiffany, there had been two major types of glass used in stained glass windows: cathedral, or transparent, and opalescent. Cathedral stained glass, which you can see on the left, as the name implies, cathedral stained glass, which was used in some of the early monastery windows, is transparent, which allows viewers to see through the glass and is often monochromatic, or one single color. Opalescent glass, as the name implied, is not transparent, but has a milky consistency, which is controlled by how much opal is added to the glass. This makes the glass more difficult to see through, but also allows light coming through it to be diffused and create a soft glow. Opalescent glass allows for more than one color to be in the piece of glass and provides a variety of textures. Tiffany preferred opalescent glass because it looked good and can be enjoyed whether or not light was shining directly through it, so that you can see today that even on a gray, not very sunny day, the windows still look beautiful. But he took it to another level. He invented something called Favrile glass. Derived from the Old English Favrile, meaning belonging to a craftsman or his craft, Favrile glass was a type of opalescent glass, trademarked by Tiffany in 1880. It used metal oxides to give the glass a unique iridescent sheen. And so the image of Favrile glass that I've included here is actually a detail shot from this angel window, the clouds kind of at the bottom. So that was a unique invention from Tiffany. The studio also invented techniques to achieve special effects and textures in the glass, such as drapery glass, confetti glass, and plating. Confetti glass, which you can see in this example, was made by pouring molten glass on top of pieces of colored glass, or by sprinkling pieces of colored glass into hot glass. Drapery glass was invented for the use of garments. To make this style, they manipulated sheets of glass while they were cooling, lifting the glass with tongs to create ridges and folds. This glass was also used to create flower petals, and examples of drapery glass can be seen in drapery and confetti glass can be seen here. So this is drapery glass, and down here, these little kind of sparkles are confetti glass. Thanks. The other technique that they came up with was called plating, and that was used to control the amount of light coming through the glass, and was made by building up layers of stained glass. It also was able to have special effect with colors, and you can see how plating works in this mountain in the Christ the Good Shepherd window, which is just over here. You can see that there's two major different colors in one piece of glass, and that was achieved by plating. But for all of these techniques, the most important thing to Tiffany was that they were effects created by the glass itself, not by adding painting later on. And so you can see here kind of a comparison of how drapery this is drapery done by painting in a medieval stained glass window versus drapery done by Tiffany, where the various textures are achieved by manipulating the glass itself as opposed to painting on the details later. And this window is from Pilgrimage Church of Maria Strassingel from about 1350 in Styria, Austria. And again, we saw this window before, but you saw how paint was used to achieve a lot of the features on this, versus in a Tiffany stained glass window, the paint really was only used for eyes, the hair detail, and maybe like making his hand, but everything else was achieved with the glass itself. Another important name to be aware of, we are most familiar with Tiffany, but he had many people who worked at his studio throughout the years, and one who was significant to our church is John William Ketchum Berrien. He originally was a ship camouflage designer for the US Shipping Board during World War I, and then he went to work for Tiffany for 35 years, and he designed and installed stained glass windows. Even after Tiffany's death in 1933, Berrien worked for the company until the mid-40s, at which time he went off to do business on his own. He died on February 25th, 1953, and his funeral was at Second Reformed. The church's Gethsemane window, which is back corner over here, was designed by him, and it was installed a couple of weeks after he died in 1953. So now on to our stained glass windows. According to a New York Times article by Rita Reif in 1979, some of Tiffany's favorite windows are in Hackensack at the Second Reformed Church at Anderson Ward and Union Streets. Tiffany frequently visited there with clients in tow, using the visit to help them select appropriate design for their purposes. The 10 Tiffany windows were included as examples of the designer's realistic and more impressionistic styles, all of them popular Christian themes. Second Reformed originally asked Tiffany and Company to submit plans for stained glass windows for the original building, the State Street Church, in 1905, and a contract was awarded May 12th. Unfortunately, those windows were destroyed in the 1907 fire, but in planning for the current building, the building committee resolved that the new windows be devoted to depicting events in the life of Christ, and after comparing proposals from 2 studios, they contracted 5 windows from Tiffany. All of the Tiffany windows were installed between 1908 and 1936, and the original dedication ceremony was on September 19th, 1909. The placement of each window was carefully considered, and each window is affected by the light at different times of the day and the year. For example, the west windows are best when warm, red, late afternoon light hits them, and there are many sunrise and sunset themes there. So those are the windows on this side of the church. Our windows were also rededicated in 2010. And you can see here that there are 2 types of signatures of Tiffany's that you can see on these windows. The older one is the block letters, and the later windows are the script signature. We're going to start in this corner. This is the resurrection window. Approved by the consistory on February 14th, 1896, and unveiled on Easter Sunday, the first version of this window was in the original State Street Church building and was given by Elder Peter Bogart in memory of his daughter, Rachel, who died at the age of 39. After that window was destroyed in the 1907 fire, it was copied exactly when the current building was built in 1909, and it was dedicated on Easter Sunday, 1909. Reverend Johnson, who was the pastor at that time, described the window as most beautiful in color and conception. The windows at the church are among the choicest works of the Tiffany Studios of New York City. You can also see on this slide some watercolor sketches. These were done by Phyllis Stabe Jones in 1940. An interesting fact about this window is that some of the structural bars had to be curved to go around the figure's head so they wouldn't be going straight through their heads. You can see that on the angel and on the one figure at the bottom here. This window portrays the familiar biblical story of the 3 women at the tomb being told by an angel that Jesus had risen and was not there. This particular design, however, happens to be the recreation of a painting entitled Resurrection by the German painter and graphic artist Bernhard Plockhorst. Living from 1825 to 1907, Plockhorst's drawings of biblical scenes and figures were very popular and have been widely reproduced. You can see here 2 other stained glass windows that also copy Plockhorst's painting. The one on the left is from the First Presbyterian Church in Delavan, Illinois. That is not a Tiffany window, it was made in Germany. But you can also see another Tiffany version of this window called the Empty Tomb, which is in St. George's Episcopal Church in Newburgh, New York. The next window was given in 1909 when this current building was built. It was given by Mr. and Mrs. James R. Marshall in memory of their son, James Lynn Marshall, who died at the age of 13. The theme is that of Christ the Good Shepherd, holding his staff and guiding a young boy along the way. And we can see here some additional Tiffany windows that follow this same theme. The first is from the New Utrecht Reformed Church in Brooklyn. Then there's St. Timothy's Episcopal Church in Ohio. and the Metropolitan Baptist Church in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, all have similar windows. The next window was presented on April 21st, 1929 by Mrs. William N. Johnson in memory of her husband, who was Senator Johnson. We can see in this window the goodness and mercy angels. Goodness is the angel on the left who is coming down to earth, and mercy is going up to heaven. You can tell which one is which because of their feet. Goodness is coming down and mercy is pushing up off to go up into heaven. Goodness holds lilies in her hand, which are symbolic of the gifts which help and cheer. Mercy holds a light to guide our way and a jeweled crown symbolizing consummation, victory, and the goal of heaven. And going back to this image, you can see that there's delicate work in the wings and a circular composition. The design moves the viewer's eyes through and around both of the long vertical panels. The lilies that Goodness is holding pop up quite a bit in our Tiffany windows. Legend has it that they were formed from either the sweat and tears of Christ during his suffering on the cross, or from the tears of Eve leaving the Garden of Eden. Their whiteness symbolizes purity, virtue, innocence, life, and hope. And there are also links to Easter lilies in Roman mythology, which states that their origins are from the milk of Juno, which fell to earth as she nursed Hercules. They appear frequently in depictions of Mary. You can actually see some lilies over here in this window by Mary in the Annunciation. And you'll also sometimes see them in depictions of the Nativity. Finally, lilies were the only thing found in Christ's tomb on Easter Day when the women went to look for him. So lilies are a popular theme. And we can see a Tiffany version, a similar, not too similar, but somewhat similar version also of Goodness and Mercy, Tiffany window in the St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Richmond, Virginia. Our next window, I'm kind of going out of order, but this is the window that's in our current dining room, and it's called Christ Blessing the Little Children. Originally, the window was designed not by Tiffany, but by J&R Lamb Studios, and was situated in a memorial room that connected the church and the chapel, and was used as a primary classroom in the State Street Church. Reverend Johnson, the pastor at the time, stated that the window is rich in colors through which God's sunlight in the coming years will shine as a reminder of the beautiful young life and the gift of bereaved love to this church. After that window was destroyed in the fire, a new window, this time made by Tiffany, was part of the original construction of this building in 1909. The window and chapel were given in memory of Walter W. Johnson by his parents, Maria and Senator William Johnson. And he was the eldest of their 3 children and died at 16 of spinal meningitis while attending the Lawrenceville School. And you can see here a watercolor version of that window. The next window, back in here, has gone by 2 names, Christ at the Sea and Christ the Teacher on the Shores of Galilee. It was given by Charles Lynn in memory of his wife Euphemia Terhune, and was dedicated on June 16th, 1929. We can see, again, you can see some Easter lilies in here. Oops, there they are. And they signify resurrection and hope. The window declares, I am the way and the truth and the life, and it's a particularly beautiful window during sunset hours. Next, we have Jesus Blessing the Little Children, and this was given for the 75th anniversary of the church in 1930 by the congregation in memory of Reverend Johnson. You'll remember he's the one who was pastor when the church burned down and had served the church for 39 years. Reverend Johnson tragically died in a car accident in 1930, 8 years after his retirement from Second Reformed. Beloved by all, Reverend Johnson was described as a polished gentleman, genial and considerate, and his kindly disposition and happy manner never failed to impress all with whom he came in contact and made him friends that were legion. His wife was a soprano in the church choir and served the church as valiantly as her husband. This window has exquisite examples of Favriles glass, peach, rose, lavender, purple, and red in the sunset. The sky is symbolic of heavenly grandeur, and like the previous window, it's best viewed at the end of the day when the western light of the sunset hits. And we can see here some examples that have similar themes, some more Tiffany windows. These are from St. Thomas Episcopal Church in Thomasville, Georgia, Peace Memorial Presbyterian Church in Clearwater, Florida, and Central Presbyterian Church in Petersburg, Illinois. Now we come to the windows that are at the back of the sanctuary. Unfortunately, not much is known about these two windows. The one that is on my left, in that back corner, is the sunrise window, and is a lancet shape. This was made by J&R Lamb Studios, and is dedicated to the R of that duo, Richard Lamb. J&R Lamb is the oldest continually operating stained glass studio in the US. It actually predates Tiffany, and is still running today. Several of our windows were produced by J&R Lamb Studios, and they've also assisted us with repairs to the windows over the years. Now we come to our biggest window. It's been known variously as the Angels of Praise, Angels of the Elements, and Gloria in Excelsis. A different version of this window appeared in the original State Street Church, and that window represented Christ and womanhood and was dedicated on July 24th, 1898. The current version was part of the original construction of the building in 1909. Described in a newspaper article about the church's dedication, the window was listed as one of the features that combines to form an unusually attractive interior. It has a sense of vertical upward flight as the tallest window of our church, and goes from deep blue hues at the bottom to lighter colors on top. And that's a full-length view of the window. The window was given by Alva W. Brown in memory of his first wife, Martha Anderson Brown, and is a Tiffany creation. Reverend Johnson stated, "As the light streams through these windows, may it remind us that it is only in the light of God's countenance our lives can be made beautiful and virtuous." If you were to walk out of our church from the back and look to your left or your right, you will see some stained glass windows that are actually honors our veterans from World War I and World War II. When you enter the church, the one on the right quotes Matthew, "Follow me and I will make you fishers of men. Thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve." Both of these windows were made by Frank W. Wiley Studios and were installed in 1948. And these are the other set of windows. And now we coming back inside the sanctuary. This is the sunset window. The other one was the sunrise window. It's also in a lancet shape and made by J&R Lamb Studios. This window is dedicated to the memory of Elmer Johnson Smith, and the inscription under the window is a line from the poem Life by Anna Letitia Barbode. The window in the back corner next to the sunset window represents Christ praying in Gethsemane before his arrest. As mentioned before, it's not a Tiffany window, but was made by one of his artists, John K. Berrien, and was dedicated in 1953. This is the last window to be added to the church, and is dedicated to the loving memory of Edna B. Conklin and Charles S. Conklin, and in loving memory of Rebecca Clarence Foster and W. Edward Foster. So if you'll remember from earlier, Edna Conklin was very involved in getting women into politics, and she helped found the Children's Home. Newspaper clippings from the time of the installation stated that the window is an interpretation of the painting Christ Praying in the Garden. If you look at the moon and stars, you can see that there's no lead surrounding them. The technique used to create them is called acid etching of flashed glass. When flashed glass is fabricated, a thin layer of color is used to fuse the surface of another piece of colored or clear glass. In this case, blue and white glass were fused together. The piece of flashed glass is masked to help protect the areas not to be etched, which is the blue area. Hydrofluoric acid is applied to remove one of the layers, and reveal the remaining color, which is the white of the moon. A similar technique was used to create the mountain and sky that we talked about before in that window. So we talked before about how the Annunciation window was a copy of a painting. Similarly, Gethsemane is a copy of a painting by a different artist. This time the painting was by Heinrich Hoffmann, a German painter from the late 19th and early 20th century, and which appeared in the Riverside Church in New York. One person beseeched, "May the light which streams through the window ever remind us of his who is the light of the world. May its teaching hold us in the might of divine love, in divine devotion, in prayer and life. May the message which the window carries, the truth it suggests, and the beauty it holds help us in the cultivation of the beauty of holiness." Jumping around again, to your right behind there is a chapel. And the window in that chapel is titled "Christ the Good Shepherd." It was presented in 1951 by Mrs. David A. Barry, Jr., in memory of her husband, David A. Barry, Jr., who was a World War I veteran, a member of the Board of Governors of Hackensack Hospital, vice president of the Hackensack Community Chest, and a deacon at Second Reformed. It was made once again by John K. Berrien, same designer as the Gethsemane window. And at one time, the chapel was the pastor's study, and that is why every Sunday we lead the pastor out from there before every service. Once again, this window is an example of copying a painting. Now we're back to Plockhorst, who was the guy who did the painting that inspired this window. And here we can see an example from the First Presbyterian Church of Delvin, Illinois. That's the same church that the first stained glass window of the example I showed was from. So that one was made in Germany, not by Tiffany. But you can also see on the right a Tiffany window depicting this theme, which is from the Grace Episcopal Church in Port Orange, Florida. Okay, moving back again to the second window from the back, which is Christ Knocks at the Door, or Christ, the Light of the World. It was commissioned on October 18th, 1936 by Mr. Loros H. Allen in memory of his wife, Nellie Byers Allen. The theme of Christ knocking on the door was a popular theme at the time, and custom versions were done by Tiffany for many different churches. It's rich with symbolism. Christ holds a lantern representing the light he brings into the world, which shines even on the blackest night. The door he knocks on is the one to our hearts. There's no exterior handle. Only we can open it from the inside and let Christ in. A similar subject is depicted in the painting The Light of the World by William Holman Hunt, and the frame that this painting is in was made by two women, Hilda Herbert and a Miss Smith. It's on view in St. Paul's Cathedral in London, and I was lucky enough to see it when I studied abroad there. It is the most traveled work of art in art history, having been shown in most of the major towns and cities of Canada, South Africa, New Zealand, and Australia. This work, like our windows, is a sermon in a frame. Jesus holds a lantern, knocks at a door with no handle, which is overgrown with ivy and covered in rust. This door has never been opened and can only be opened from the inside. It represents our soul, which Christ asks permission to enter. Only we can let Jesus into our hearts. You will also notice the light around Christ's head, which represents salvation, the light from his lantern, which represents conscience, the morning star, symbolizing the dawn of a new day, and the falling autumnal weeds and fruit, which denote the autumn of life. The apples remind us of the Garden of Eden, and their fall represents the fall of man, original sin, and sometimes redemption. This painting and our window are truly special and deep in meaning contained within them to make them some of my favorite windows. And we can see some additional Tiffany examples of this window, which are the first one is actually in a mausoleum in Newark. The second is in the First Presbyterian Church of Pueblo, Colorado. And the last is from Covenant Presbyterian Church in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Now we come to the second window here, which is Christ's farewell interview with his disciples. There was a version of this window in the original State Street Church, which was made by J&R Lamb Studios and was given in memory of Reverend George H. Fisher, who was our second pastor, by his children. A memorial window in the original church was dedicated to him and recreated in this building under the title Christ's Farewell Interview with His Disciples. Placed on the north wall, the original window showed Christ among the doctors in the temple. It was lost in the 1907 fire, but insurance money and contributions from Mrs. Amelia V.W. Fisher allowed it to be recreated by J. Gordon Guthrie during the construction of the new building in 1909. So this is not a Tiffany window. J. Gordon Guthrie had previously worked for Tiffany, but the two had an argument and he left to work for Duffner and Kimberly Studios. Though the gold borders differentiate from Tiffany works, Guthrie's use of drapery glass, limited enamel, and plated glass are similar to works that he created during his time with Tiffany. In this window, we can see a deep amount of emotion in the expressions of the apostles. Now we come to the Annunciation, which is the window just here. This window also had a version in the original State Street Church, and it was created in 1889 in memory of Joseph G. Banta by his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Henry Banta. This family were descendants of Hendrik Epke Banta, who was one of the early settlers of Bergen County and a member of the First Reformed Church, the Church on the Green. The original window was designed by J&R Lamb and represented Plockhorst's Christ Among the Lilies. But the current window is by Tiffany, and instead of that, it depicts the Annunciation when the angel Gabriel told Mary that she was expecting the Son of God. Joseph G. Banta, who the window was in memory of, died when he was 20 years, 4 months, and 2 days old. His last words were, "Christ is coming." The window is done in pearl glass and is full color with sharp lines of light radiating from the angel Gabriel's face, which illuminate Mary's torso. As mentioned before, you can see Easter lilies by Mary. Now we come to the window that is above the door here, which is called the Singing Angels. These windows above the tower doors were completed in 1930 for the church's 75th anniversary, and this is the only window in the church that is not lit by natural light. There's actually, you can turn the light on and off behind it by switch. Representing the Singing Angels, the window was given in loving memory to Sunday school teacher Miss Anna D. Trowbridge, who was nicknamed Miss Nan. And so that's the left window, and then the right window was given in honor of Elder Philip C. Stabe, a member of the consistory from 1907 to 1949. He is described as a faithful Christian man whose life was dedicated to God and to the service of his fellow men, beloved and esteemed by all. And now we come to our spectacular rose window, which is up there. The rose window was part of the construction of the current church building in 1909. The Christian star in the center is called the Star of Hope and is made of selected quartz, which was presented by this was by Edna Conklin, once again, in memory of Mrs. Frederick Steinley, née Wilhelmina Clarendon, in 1935. It reminds us that the wise men sought someone worth seeking, and they persevered until they found him. Tiffany was commissioned to create a window which would be interactive during morning worship. Depending on the light, some days the green is more accentuated, others days the blue, and when it hits just right, sometimes it's so golden that you can't see the star in the middle. At the installation in 1909, the Metropolitan Museum of Art noted that under the personal supervision of Mr. Louis C. Tiffany, there has been placed in the church a magnificent rose window containing a jeweled cross, extending through many openings in the circle with an illuminated background representing the sky. In 2008, this window underwent restoration by J&R Lamb Studios from Wyckoff, New Jersey. They removed the aged putty and caulk that had been failing, and after a careful cleaning, they reapplied fresh putty to properly seal the window and all of the panels and installed a custom cover for the window to protect it. So, over the past 170 years, our church building has gone through a lot of changes. But what hasn't changed is the love and fellowship of our church. We are active in our community, we all love one another, and we look forward to having another 170 years in our history. So, if there Sorry, that was a little long. There were 170 years to get through. But are there any questions about anything? Yes, Irma?
Have the windows been, before they put the plexiglass up, were they cleaned at any point?
Not that I know of or have come up with in my research. I'm not sure. No, okay. Okay, so
I know it's expensive to have done, but is that in any way planned for the future?
I'm not aware of any plans to clean them in the future, but I'm sure if they need it, we will do it.
I think there's a protective layer on the outside to protect it from the elements. And so I would, other than cleaning it from the inside, which what you do with it.
So when they clean it, they take it down completely and take it but all of those features, like the eyes and the nose here, would come back to the original color. You can see where they faded and you can't see the teeth. I just wondered if there was any plan.
Not that I'm aware, no, but I'm sure eventually they will need to be cleaned.
They are, but in restoration, they would be gorgeous.
Yeah. Anna?
I'm curious, there were some windows you said that was installed after the building was built. What was there before?
I'm not 100% sure, but I'm guessing that they looked somewhat like the windows that are in the hallway where it either clear or there might have been crossed glass there. But yeah, they would have been, I guess, just sort of normal windows and then got replaced with the stained glass. Anything else? All right, thank you.